Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. I'm still working on the same 4 books this week, so I'm going to do my best to keep this one short and sweet. I know I often say that, and then I end up rambling forever anyways, but it's been a long day. It's late, and I'm sick. I've got a cold. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I've got this lingering cough, which has been popping up in my videos now for a couple weeks, and seems to be getting worse instead of better. So apologies in advance if I end up coughing in this video. I just took a cough drop before filming, so we'll see how things go. So anyways, going through this quickly. Still slowly working my way through Captain America. I know it's comic books aren't supposed to take this long to read, but I've where was I last week? Last week I was on page 176, so this week I read about another 20 pages, a couple issues worth. They're short issues because Captain America was sharing his title with Iron Man. So, yeah. Entails a suspense, Iron Man and Captain America. So, these couple issues, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is involved, which hasn't really happened in this book yet, although I think Captain America does have a long history of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And then there's this French villain who is, what was his name again? Batroc. And a girl who looks to be the sister of Captain America's old lover, although they haven't quite made the connection with that yet. So yeah, it's interesting. The first few stories in this volume were just terrible, but this at least is interesting. Somewhat cliched but charismatic villain. Yeah, interesting enough. And then I actually finished off Journey to the West Volume 2 and made a video in which I attempted to give my thoughts on it. And if you watched that video, and I don't recommend it, but if you did watch that video, I'm sorry. Not my best video, I know. It turns out I really don't have any thoughts on this volume that I didn't already say in when I talked about Volume 1. Because it is just a lot more of the same. And in terms of recounting what's happened in each chapter, I've already been doing that for these weekly reading vlogs. Volume 2 is finished now. I need to go back to the library. Fingers crossed nobody's checked out Volume 3. Check out Volume 3, and then on to Volume 3, and then on to Volume 4 after that. The Linguistic Wars by Randy Allen Harris. So I'm in the home stretch with this one. I finished up Chapter 8, the 20th Century, Linguistics at Closing Time, and into Chapter 9, The Aftermath. Now, both of these chapters are kind of extended epilogues about what happened after the Linguistic Wars and the path linguistics took, but also the path that the different personalities in this book took, because it's partly a linguistic book and it's partly a drama about all the interesting personalities involved. Now, as I've been saying all along with this book, I unfortunately have a very limited capacity to deal with and understand the linguistic arguments in this book. The drama, on the other hand, I'm all there for the drama. So there was a number of theories mentioned in chapters 8 and 9. Randy Allen Harris calls this the alphabet soup of linguistics. There were so many acronyms. And some of these, like Montague grammar or Chomsky's principles and parameters or government binding theory, are briefly described. I understood some of it. I mean, to be fair, I think these are meant to be just kind of brief overviews where you're not really supposed to understand the theory in depth. You're just supposed to get a general idea of this is where the field was moving. I found it a little bit tiresome, those parts. And again, that's, I think, just my limitations as a reader. But then there was some stuff that was really interesting. To the extent that I would have liked to spend more time reading this book than I did this week. It's just been one of those weeks for me. I didn't have the time. But there was some really interesting stuff here about George Lakoff, which was not in the first edition. The book he published, Metaphors We Live By. Now, I had been vaguely familiar with this because it's quoted quite favorably by Michael Lewis in the lexical approach. And this gets into my area, which is English language teaching. So I read some of Michael Lewis's stuff, which has quoted George Lakoff. But yeah, I didn't realize the narrative part of it. And Randy Allen Harris does a very good job of describing how Metaphors We Live By fits into this general arc. No, arc's not the right word. The general framework of George Lakoff's character, where incredibly arrogant. He was positioning himself as like the first guy to discover metaphors ever. And Randy Allen Harris goes through this long list of all the linguists and philosophers who have dealt with it before Lakoff, who he completely ignores. But then goes on to say, in spite of that, it was a really groundbreaking work for the way it just systematically laid out all the metaphors that we use when we talk about stuff, and documenting as never before how much metaphors have infiltrated the language and human cognition. And that same arc pops up in chapter 9 when he talks about how Lakoff in the 2000s, George Lakoff at the epicenter, had rebranded himself as like a political linguist, like giving messaging advice to Democrats about how they should brand themselves and how they should think about language in their messaging. And talks about how that attracted conservative critics. This was a funny one. It also brought attacks from the right, of course. None more irksome to him, I'm sure, nor more revealing about how shallowly the attackers were willing to look in their search for insults than an editorial in the New York Sun that identified him as a disciple of the notoriously anti-American Massachusetts Institute of Technology professor Noam Chomsky. Because of course the book is all about how Chomsky and Lakoff hate each other's guts. So now the right wing is identifying him as a disciple of Chomsky. But then Steven Pinker gives a very dismissive review of Lakoff's book. And it goes through some of the charges Pinker leveled against Lakoff and which ones are fair and which ones aren't. Steven Pinker is somebody I've talked about a couple times before in my reviews. His book, The Language Instinct, I've talked about before. So, and some of the other personalities in here as well. I mean, really all of it was quite interesting. Jim McCauley, Paul Poster, Ray Jackendoff. Those names won't mean anything to you if you're not familiar with this book. But it was an interesting little update on where their lives had taken them, both in their kind of personal lives and their professional lives. So it's there were some sections of this book which I struggled with, but on the whole, I'm really finding it quite interesting, and look forward to finishing up the chapter and then on to chapter 10, which looks really interesting. And then how to teach listening. So, yeah, this is, I think I mentioned last week, the thing with reading this book is you're like, oh, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. That'll never work. I don't have the equipment to do that. And they're like, yeah, that one might work. You know, there are like 5 bad ideas for every good idea. But you read them because you do get, you know, out of a 150-page book, you do get several good ideas. I've used this week. I used a variation on running dictation, which is not, you know, running dictation. If you teach English, it's an old standby. Oh, sorry. This book, How to Teach Listening. I've gotten out of the habit of introducing the books before I start talking about them, huh? I'll try and watch myself in the future. Running dictation is an old standby, but it did inspire me to do an activity this week where I used running dictation to help the students reconstruct parts of the transcript and then played the audio for them to check what they had reconstructed. And the week before that, I did a vocabulary bingo one that was also suggested here. So I am finding some ideas for how to exploit the listening text in my classroom. But a lot of these ideas in here are just not feasible and just not great ideas. And the other thing is, he sets it up as, you know, the classic CELTA staging: pre-listening, well-listening, post-listening. So, you know, you do the lead-in, you get the students engaged with the topic, you set them up for it, and then you do the well-listening activities. But then a lot of his well-listening activities do not fit in to a listening lesson. Like Simon Says, or Change Chairs If, or you know, all his dictation activities. You know, they're listening in the sense that the students have to listen to the teacher say something, or the students have to listen to an oral command. But how does this fit in with his structure? I mean, these don't go inside of a listening lesson. These are just listening activities, which he's stuck into his well-listening thing. And I think part of the thing is, probably there wasn't enough to say about a traditional CELTA-style listening lesson to fill out a book like that, like this, even though it's a short book. So, yeah, I mean, I get that these are activities that practice the students listening, but they should be in a separate section than the well-listening activities, which you're reading along as you're reading how to stage a listening lesson. So that's my irritation with that for the week. That being said, I am still getting a couple of good ideas out of this, and am more than halfway through. So hopefully I'll crack on with this book and finish up sometime soon. Okay, I'm going to stop here.